Welcome to this lesson on Will It Be So Again by Cecil Day Lewis. This is one of the poems in the current IEB Poetry syllabus for 2023 to 2025. A reminder that it is really important that you study this poem for yourself. This lesson should really just be supporting your studying and not replacing it. It's important that you know how to explain the poem in your own words, that you know how to identify all the poetic devices that are used, and that you have actually engaged with the poem on your own and done your own analysis. Another reminder that while I try to be comprehensive and detailed in my lesson, you will find other observations and other perspectives as you do your own analysis and as you do some research on this poem, and that is completely fine. Poetry is meant to be subjective, it's meant to be interpreted in many ways, and as long as you can base your analysis on evidence from the poem, as long as you're substantiating everything that you're saying from the poem, that's completely fine. When we look at the poet Cecil Day Lewis, we see that he was an Irish poet, novelist, and critic. He is very, very well known in the literary world. He was the son of a clergyman, so his father worked for the church, and he grew up in London where they moved after his mother's death. He attended Oxford University and later actually became a professor of poetry at the university. And in the 1930s, he was a big communist and political activist, but later on in his life, he became quite disillusioned with the communist values and the communist ideology, and he moved away from communism and his views changed. And he used writing, he used literature, his poetry to share his left-wing political views and his belief that capitalism, fascism, and war have negative impacts on our society. And this poem we're going to be studying today looks at the negative impact. It looks at the futility and the stupidity of war and how it impacts society. In 1968, he was appointed the Poet Laureate of Britain, but he passed on 4 years later in 1972 from pancreatic cancer. So we're going to read through the poem before we get started on the analysis, and it's important that as we read it, you already pick up on certain words and phrases that stick out to you, and that you are able to kind of start seeing the main message and themes of the poem just by reading through it. So let's read Will It Be So Again by Cecil Day Lewis. Will it be so again that the brave, the gifted are lost from view, and empty, scheming men are left in peace, their lunatic age to renew? Will it be so again? Must it always be so, that the best are chosen to fall and sleep like seeds, and we too slow in claiming the earth they quicken, the old usurpers reap what they could not sow? Will it be so again, the jungle code and the hypocrite gesture, a poppy wreath for the slain and a cutthroat world for the living, that stale imposture played on us once again? Will it be as before, peace with no heart or mind to ensure it, guttering down to war like a libertine to his grave? We should not be surprised. We knew it happened before. Shall it be so again? Call not upon the glorious dead to be your witnesses then. The living alone can nail to their promise the ones who said, it shall not be so again. A really, really beautiful poem. I really enjoy this poem. I think it's such a wonderful addition to the syllabus. And it is one of those fantastic anti-war poems that kind of reflects on human nature and the fact that we as humans keep allowing ourselves to fall into these cycles of going to war, and where young men are losing their lives in these wars because lunatic men, as the poet refers to them, keep creating these wars. And it's this constant cycle of having a war and then having a moment of peace, and it's a very superficial peace because the people who are benefiting from war don't actually want peace, and we just go back into having another war and more men lose their lives. And so it's this really wonderful poem that reflects Cecil Day Lewis's anti-war rhetoric, that reflects his feelings about war. And obviously, I mean, this is important for somebody who lived in the times of the great wars that we've seen in the 20th century, like World War I and World War II. Sorry, for a moment there, I was like, are we in the 20th or the 21st century? So if we look at the structure and the form of this poem, it is made up of 5 quatrains, which means that the lines are made up of 5, or the stanzas, sorry, are made up of 5 lines. And each of these quatrains are framed by rhetorical questions at the beginning and at the end. And these rhetorical questions are emphasizing that central issue of why do we keep allowing ourselves to go to war, but this issue is seen from different perspectives each time using these rhetorical questions. in German throughout the poem quickens the pace of the poem and is there to help highlight the frustration that the speaker feels with the futility of war and the fact that young soldiers are being sacrificed over and over again for these wars that only benefit the politicians. The rhythm and the rhyme are very harsh, they're very forceful, and this really reflects the bitter and the harsh tone that the speaker has that also helps to reinforce that message. When we look at the intention or the purpose behind writing this poem, the speaker is really trying to convict future generations. He's urging future generations to question war, to question why we go to war. And it implores these future generations to find sustainable solutions so that we can stop going to war and to hold leaders accountable for their promises. You know, when leaders tell us we will never go to war again, okay, but who's holding them accountable? And we need to hold them accountable for their actions in creating these wars and sending young men to die in these wars. So the message here is really driven by the rhetorical questions and specifically the main one of will it be so again? It's really emphasizing the fact that lives are being lost and that this is happening over and over. And why do we keep falling victim to the horrors of war? Why do we keep allowing leaders and politicians to drag us into these wars where they are the only ones benefiting? So the speaker suggests that the only reason we keep going back to war is because it's benefiting the empty, scheming men who are sending the young men to be sacrificed. These old usurpers are not the ones that are actually going to fight. The politicians are not the ones losing their lives, and yet they are so fine sending young men to lose their lives in a war that they created. So take a minute to acquaint yourself with the way I've done the analysis here. You can see that we've taken the poem a couple of lines at a time, and the analysis is kind of around the poem, and obviously the colors all relate to each other. So the first couple of lines say, will it be so again that the brave, the gifted are lost from view, and empty, scheming men are left in peace, their lunatic age to renew? Will it be so again? So we see that rhetorical question that's framing these first 5 lines, starting off the poem and really delving into that underlying connection. And in framing the poem, it drives that conviction that we're feeling, that conviction of why do we keep doing this? So will it be so again? That again implies that it's happened before. You can't have something happen again without it first happening in the first place. And again is repeated 6 times in the poem to really emphasize that idea of, are we really in this place again? Are we really dealing with this again? That the brave, the gifted are lost from view. So he's got this beautiful tribute, and you're going to see this the whole way through the poem. The way the speaker speaks about the soldiers dying is a very celebratory kind of glorification of them. They're brave, they are gifted. And so we see that they're brave for going, and they were gifted. They had bright futures ahead of them that they will now never get to be in or get to see because they were sent off to war to die. For who? For empty, scheming men who are left in peace, their lunatic age to renew. So very strong, harsh diction. Empty, scheming men, lunatics. You know, really think about the connotations of those words and the fact that he's using these words to describe the leaders of the countries who are creating these wars. And so the idea here is that politicians are sending men to war, but the politicians themselves don't actually fight. They get to live in peace and they get to benefit from the war. And so this process of never losing your life in the war but sending young men to die means that they are able to start their lunacy all over again and their love of war all over again because they're not the ones dying. And so it's very easy almost for them to forget the sacrifices that were made in the war because they weren't the one making a sacrifice. And so these cycles of lunacy and scheming and these wars can just continue going. And then like we saw, it's ended there again with will it be so again, really driving that conviction, really driving that underlying question. The next couple of lines say, must it always be so that the best are chosen to fall and sleep like seeds, and we too slow in claiming the earth they quicken, and the old usurpers reap what they could not sow? So we now have a different type of question. Must it always be so? And that must is really implying that, is this really necessary? Is this really our duty? Must this be something that we do? And the always there, like the again, implies that this has happened before, that we do not learn. It's always like this. It never changes. We don't learn. That the best are chosen to fall asleep. Once again, saying there, the soldiers are the best of us, that glorification, that tribute to these soldiers. are chosen to fall and sleep. There's that metaphor for death, that death is, likened to sleep. They fall when they're shot or when they're killed, and then they go to sleep. And that chosen, who are chosen to fall and sleep, chosen by whom? Is referring here to the draft where, they had to go and go into war. They had to sign up, that the leaders are choosing these young men to die. It's this implication that these young men did not have to die. They were chosen to do this. It's not maybe something that they chose to do themselves. And so these, the best of us, are like seeds, and we too slow in claiming the earth they quicken. The simile here is that the soldiers, when they die, are like seeds that are planted. Their sacrifice is like a seed that is planted. And these seeds are quickening the earth in the sense that we can now take their sacrifice and we can learn from it and make a new world. But what he's saying is that we don't do that. We're too slow in claiming that earth that they quickened, in claiming that earth that they were populating with their sacrifice, because we don't create new worlds. We don't learn from their deaths. We just kind of let their deaths go to waste. Their sacrifices are a waste because we don't change. We don't make things better. And the old usurpers reap what they could not sow. The only people who are reaping, the only people who are harvesting from these deaths are the politicians, are the old men, the old leaders who created the war and did not fight in it. And once again, we see that diction there on old usurpers. A usurper is someone who claims the throne, who claims power without having any real claim to it, without having any real right to it. And so it's this idea that these old men actually have no right to the power that they are claiming. And in their power, they are completely nullifying the sacrifice that these soldiers made by dying in the war that these men created. We move on to Will It Be So Again? The Jungle Code and the Hypocrite Gesture, a poppy wreath for the slain and a cutthroat world for the living. That stale imposture played on us once again. So we go back to that Will It Be So Again, using that same kind of phrase and emphasizing the futility of this war cycle. The Jungle Code and the Hypocrite Gesture. Jungle Code there implies a brutality, a survival of the fittest. But Hypocrite Gesture tells us that the survival of the fittest, those who are the fittest, are those who play the politics game well, those who are the ones creating these wars. It's not actually, real survival of the fittest. It's who can be the best hypocrite. And that links down there to a cutthroat world for the living. A poppy wreath for the slain and a cutthroat world for the living. So the cycle continues, the cycle of war, because we celebrate the soldiers with a poppy wreath, like these tributes to them. And you kind of get the feeling, is he maybe mocking the tributes that we make? And not mocking them, for their intention, like, of course not, but mocking them in the sense of like, these men gave up their lives. And all we do is kind of give them a poppy wreath, like give them this little tribute for their lives that they gave up in this war that was created by men who are benefiting from the war. And he's saying, so we do these little moments of tribute, but then we just go straight back to having a cutthroat world for those who were left behind, for those who are living. The world is not a good place to live in. And so it's this idea as well that, okay, so the politicians are creating these wars and these men are dying, but the world doesn't become better after that. So what actually are we doing this for? And that is why this relates to that idea of futility, of the absolute nothingness of war. It doesn't mean anything. And in meaning nothing, it's taking lives unnecessarily. That stale imposture played on us once again. Stale imposture there. An imposture is when you pretend to be something else or someone else to deceive others. And stale there shows that it's old, it's useless. So he's saying these old lies, these old acts that the politicians are putting on are playing us. We are being tricked with these acts, these tributes for the dead and the promises of war not happening again. And we believe it. And so the cycle of war just continues going on and on and on. And it's almost putting a bit of responsibility on the citizens of like, we are the ones being played. We are the ones being tricked. And we're believing it every single time. We need to stand up and do something about this. And so he continues into, will it be as before? Peace with no heart or mind to ensure it, guttering down to war like a libertine to his grave. We should not be surprised. We knew it happened before. So this will it be as before is just a rephrasing of will it be so again. It's still the same sentiment. As before is the same thing as again. Peace with no heart or mind to ensure it. This is saying that peace is superficial, it's temporary, because politicians don't actually care for it. They don't actually want it. There's no heart or mind behind sustaining the peace. And so this then gutters down to war. These ideologies of the politicians that are all about benefiting themselves, that are not about sustaining the peace, are like a gutter taking rainwater to its destination. These agendas are filtering down to the people who are then sent to fight in these wars. And there's this idea that there's an inevitability of war happening when we fail to hold our leaders accountable, when we fail to hold them accountable for the promises that they've made, when we fail to hold them accountable for the actions that they're taking. War is inevitable, and the people are the ones who are dying in that inevitable war. So guttering down to war like a libertine to his grave, this is a simile. A libertine is someone who doesn't have morals or inhibitions or restraints. And so it's this idea that these agendas and everything that's happening here, it's these politicians who are enjoying their life of no restraint in creating these wars. But it's not them going to their graves. It's not them feeling the death. It's the soldiers who are feeling the consequences of this death. So we should not be surprised. We knew it happened before. And this links back to what he said in the previous couple of lines of, we've been played by this. It's the cycle. We keep going through the same thing over and over. And so we shouldn't be surprised when another war happens, more people die, politicians benefit, politicians promise peace, and it just continues in that cycle. We shouldn't be surprised. This is what humankind does because we do not hold people accountable. And it ends with, shall it be so again? Call not upon the glorious dead to be your witnesses then. The living alone can nail to their promise the ones who said, it shall not be so again. So he ends off again with that, shall it be so again, which is very similar to the will it be so again. And it's really, after everything he said, he asks this question again for us to really question the validity of war and the likelihood of it happening again and why it happens. And he says, call not upon the glorious dead to be your witnesses then. Again, a tribute to those who have died. And he says here, you can't ask the dead if we're going to see war again because they've already been sacrificed to war. They can't witness the promise of it not happening again. And so it's really a reminder of those who have been lost to war and the fact that they've seen the end of war because they're dead. And we now are going to question, is war going to keep coming? The living alone can nail to their promises the ones who said, it shall not be so again. This is a call to the living, a call to those who are left behind after the war, to hold the politicians accountable, to nail to their promises, and to keep them to their promises of not allowing another war to happen. And so the politicians are the one who said, it shall not be so again. But it's such a good way to end the poem by taking the question that it started with, will it be so again, and turning it into a statement, it shall not be so again, emphasizing that poet's belief in the futility of war and the importance of embracing long-term solutions that prevent war. So yes, this is something that the politicians keep saying, but it's something that we should believe in, and it's something that we should fight for and really strive for, that war shall not be so again. This poem is a great reminder of the quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt, who said, war is young men dying and old men talking. And I really just feel that this quote really sums up what this poem is all about and what the poem is saying. So if you want access to the presentation that I've used in this lesson, you can use the QR code, or you can go to my Instagram page, to the link in my bio, at Ms. Shaw, and go and find the Google Drive full of resources there. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson. And please remember, it's super important that you study this poem for yourself, that you analyze it for yourself. And remember to please always, always justify what you're saying, what your analysis is from the poem with evidence from the poem.